Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Do nuclear weapons make us safer? Are we really better off if we have more nuclear weapons? Today we're going to talk about this and other aspects of having nuclear weapons. My guest today is an expert in this area. My guest today is Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu. She is the Undersecretary General and High Representative for the United Nations Disarmament Affairs. Prior to taking this post, Ms. Nakamitsu served as Assistant Administrator of the Crisis Response Unit at the UN Development Program. Ms. Nakamitsu, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you being with me today. You're in a very important area and a very volatile area too, and we're going to get into this in just a moment. But let's talk a little bit about your Office for Disarmament Affairs. When was it formed, and what is your main mission?
Well, as you know, the UN keeps reforming and restructuring. So the name of the office changed a couple of times in the UN's history. But the first creation of my office, at the time it was called Division for Disarmament. That was created, I understand, 1977. So it goes back quite a lot. It used to be within the Department for Political Affairs. And then, as I said, the name changed a few times. At some point it was a center, at some point it was a department. But the current form, Office for Disarmament Affairs, came into its shape in 2007. And of course the mandate is to support the multilateral efforts towards achieving general and complete disarmament under strict and international control. And that obviously includes nuclear disarmament as well, and many other aspects of disarmament efforts.
It certainly does, yes. And our viewers can go to your website at un.org/disarmament to learn more about what you're doing. Now, I think it was in May of this past year, the Secretary General, not Undersecretary General, Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the United Nations came up with a disarmament agenda. What was the overall theme of that disarmament agenda, and maybe two or three of the main points?
Sure. The overall title of that disarmament agenda is Securing Our Common Future. And it is a very comprehensive set of disarmament agenda, not just nuclear, but conventional weapons, and also the implication of science and technology on international peace and security. So it is a very comprehensive set of very practical, actionable issues covering entire international peace and security and the disarmament area. Some themes, there are 4 pillars of the agenda. The first one is disarmament to save humanity. That's obviously nuclear weapons and other strategic weapons. The second pillar is disarmament that saves lives. Conventional weapons, the impact of those small arms and other types of conventional weapons on humans, on our lives. And then the third pillar is the science and technology impacting or about to impact our security. It's entitled Disarmament for Future Generations. And the fourth and the final pillar is Partnership for Disarmament. We felt very strongly that we need to really reinforce and further strengthen our general partnership for disarmament, a little bit like what it used to be, more people to be interested and then taking part in disarmament efforts.
And this sounds very comprehensive. It sounds like you covered the waterfront on that. I'm glad you mentioned number 2 about conventional arms. We so often forget that. We think about the big nuclear weapons, the ICBMs and different ones like that, but that is very important also. Is there anything in the Secretary General's disarmament agenda to encourage the nuclear powers to come back to the table to negotiate together and not maybe strike bilateral arrangements and different things like that?
Absolutely, quite a few. I mean, also just to paraphrase this, I mean, this is our actions, this is the UN system actions. Of course, disarmament is also a responsibility of member states, governments, but we wanted to have this agenda to really support the member states' actions and then push the member states to fulfill their responsibility for disarmament. So in the nuclear area, one of the first and a very important priority actions that we are trying to undertake is definitely to encourage those nuclear weapon states to return to a dialogue path. First and foremost, when the international security environment is getting very difficult, one important element for achieving our common objective is for those countries to return to sincere, productive and substantive dialogues. And then we are standing ready definitely to facilitate if there is in fact a need and a request from those countries to facilitate. And we have a number of concrete ideas for that as well.
Exactly. Now we've been hearing a lot more lately about cyber warfare, killer robots, use of artificial intelligence, that type of thing. Were those items discussed in that? I know you're dealing with them, but were they included in that agenda?
Absolutely, yes. That's in the third pillar, the disarmament for future generations. We talk a lot about how UN really needs to start actually taking a little bit more, if you will, innovative approaches. For example, using our convening power, the UN still is looked at, as one of the, key actors that can bring different entities together, including the private sector, the researchers, scientists and engineers, to bring together those different actors, in addition to, of course, member states, the government representatives, so that we can actually start creating or help create global culture for accountability, adherence to emerging norms in cyber space, for example. There are already discussions taking place in the spheres of cybersecurity, but also in AI, what we call lethal autonomous weapon systems, laws, that is being discussed in the context of a CCW, Convention for Certain Conventional Weapons mechanisms. So we are definitely encouraging member states to take a greater responsibilities, and then we are doing a lot of work in these areas as well.
Now, the UN took the lead also. In 2017, you had the Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty, and that was a major landmark agreement. What is the thrust of that, and what is the status of it today?
Yes. So this treaty was negotiated here in New York, and it was adopted with 122 member states voting in favor. As you can see, a lot of member states did not participate in the negotiation of this treaty, but still a majority of UN member states supported the creation of this treaty. It will go into effect. It's not put into effect yet. I think as of today, there are 22 ratifications, the most recent one being South Africa. When we have 50 ratifications, the treaty will, 90 days afterwards, the treaty will go into effect. So it's still in the process of, collecting ratifications, etc. But the major, achievement, no doubt, it is in fact the only multilateral nuclear disarmament treaty that has been negotiated and adopted in more than 20 years. So from that point of view, it is definitely very significant. I think it's safe to say that it has been a very controversial treaty, because nuclear weapon states obviously did not participate, and there are still very strong objections expressed by those nuclear weapon states and many of their allies. But the major objective is to ban the treaty, prohibit the entire aspects of nuclear weapons. So I think it was an expression by so many UN member states at a stalemate in nuclear disarmament for so long. As I mentioned, 20 plus years, nothing happened in multilateral disarmament negotiations. And that frustration was felt by so many member states, and that actually resulted in this prohibition treaty.
And of course, nuclear weapons are very hard not only to build, cost a lot to build them, but also to maintain them. I saw figures a few years ago where the United States alone spends like $125 million a day, I think it is, to maintain the nuclear stockpile. That's a huge amount of money. That figure may be higher, may be lower, I'm not too sure, but it's still very expensive to do that. But also, do we not run the risk of accidents happening? I've read, I think, 12 since back in the 50s, where
That's
we
right,
almost
yes.
had nuclear exchanges,
Yeah.
and all we need is one, and that could literally destroy the Earth.
That's
I mean,
right.
we don't need a small nuclear weapon,
Yes.
but just the fallout from that alone,
That's right.
the global winter, I guess is what they call it, would do us in. But what can we do to reduce this possibility of us having some type of accidental exchange?
We think there are actually quite a lot of things that we could do. It is a fact today the security environment is really deteriorating. The great power competitions are really, getting intense. But still, we think we can actually do a lot of things to reduce the risk of nuclear confrontations. I mean, just to give you very concrete steps, if you can improve the transparency of nuclear weapons programs by those, nuclear weapon states, if you can reduce the operational readiness of nuclear weapons, if you can also review and reduce the reliance or dependence in national security military doctrines over nuclear weapons. These are all the measures that each of those nuclear weapon states can take that will in turn also build confidence I would say greatly reduce the risk of nuclear accidents or incidents. But also, we are also trying to do a concrete and practical work at the multilateral levels as well. One of the things that is ongoing at the moment is to develop a standard for nuclear disarmament verifications, for example. So there are measures that we could actually take in very practical, pragmatic areas which will contribute to not just reducing risks, but also eventually contribute to nuclear disarmament as well.
Mm-hmm. That would be very helpful to provide confidence building and to make sure that people were not cheating.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with any type of a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you like our shows and would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're taking a look at this whole issue of nuclear weapons and conventional weapons also, and trying to determine if we're actually safer with them or with some better type of controls or regulation of them. My guest today is an expert on this topic. My guest today is Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, and she is the Undersecretary General and High Representative for the United Nations Disarmament Affairs. Madam Undersecretary General, we've got so many nuclear deals to deal with.
Yes.
Lately, we've seen that, Russia and the United States have gotten out of the INF, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, and it wasn't a perfect agreement, but still it was keeping them together talking
That's
about
right.
these issues. How dangerous is that with them withdrawing from that? Does that destabilize the situation a little more?
We think so. As you know, probably the Secretary General has noted with regrets the Russian and the US statements so far over the INF Treaty. It was actually quite a significant treaty. It actually eliminated an entire class of weapon systems. And it has actually contributed to the end of the Cold War as such, and also really stabilized the security situations especially in Europe. We still call upon both parties to use the next 6 months or so to try and resolve the differences, and therefore maintaining this. We hope that will still be the case. I think it is very important that even though the current disarmament and arms control agreements are obviously not perfect, and there are new environments, at the international level. So probably it is true that we need to start building a new vision for disarmament and arms control. But before we have that new vision, whatever that might be, let's try to protect what we have at the moment, whilst at the same time we work towards having a better deal. So we are still calling on two parties, both of the parties, to try and resolve the differences. What is important, of course, in an international agreement is the compliance issues, and also the old sort of wisdom of trust but verify. So there will have to be a concrete measures for verifications that would also increase the trust and confidence. So these are important elements of having an effective international agreement, and we very much still hope that that will be a case
exactly.
when it comes to INF.
And you're so right. Trust but verify.
Yes.
You have to have that confidence level that
That's
the
right.
other person, the other country is not getting it. Well, the UN has also been involved in 2014, I guess it was the Arms Trade Treaty.
Yes.
We're talking about small arms. Now we'll go to
Yes.
small arms.
Yeah.
Do that. What was the thrust of that particular treaty, and where is it today?
So this is a first, treaty that created a norm over international transfer trade of conventional weapons. Essentially what it does is to regulate international trade of arms, to making sure that these arms are not going to the government, for example, if we know that governments are likely to use those weapons against civilians, or if we know or if we fear that the government is likely to use those weapons in violation of human rights. So this is very important trading agreement, and very positive. Today we have 100 states parties ratifying this treaty. So it is now becoming a very important instrument at the multilateral international level that has really, I think, strengthened the norm of making sure that the humanitarian impact of those conventional weapons will be mitigated and minimized.
I remember back during the debate, and it was a very vigorous debate, as I recall, but I remember one group, the U.S.-based National Rifle Association, which represents a small number of gun owners in the United States, and they were arguing against it, said that it was a violation of the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which gives theoretically individuals the right to bear arms. Really, it's for the militias, but we interpret it that way in the United States. But that really is not the case, is it? Or how do you view that?
No,
You're the expert, I'm not.
I wasn't here at the time, but I really don't understand how that misunderstanding or misrepresentation could happen. I mean, this is a treaty that regulates international trade, and right to bear arms in the United States is strictly a domestic issue. So, ATT, Arms Trade Treaty, really has absolutely nothing to do with, the domestic U.S. regulations for the citizens of the United States. So that is absolutely not the case.
Yes, well, there's so much bogus information out about the United Nations that we hear all the time about. Years ago, it used to be the John Birch Society talked about black helicopters, and then you hear about some of the talk show hosts saying the United States is taking over the parks and the rivers in the United States. The UN is taking over, which is not true. None of this is true, but we deal with the myths as we come to them. Really the I guess the foundation for all of this, or a large part of it, is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
Yes.
That's a very comprehensive treaty, but when was that adopted, and why is that the underpinning for what we're trying to do today?
Yes, no, thank you. I mean, NPT is, I think, widely considered as one of the cornerstones or important pillar of international security architecture today. It has, 191 states parties, In 2020, we will have the review conference, and that also coincides with the 50th year anniversary of the treaty entering into force. So it's a very old treaty, or relatively old treaty, and I would say that it has been a successful treaty that really underpins the security framework and architecture as we have it today. Back in the 1960s, people feared, generally speaking, that there will be 20 or 30 nuclear weapon states, but today it's definitely less than half of that. So the treaty has managed to make sure that the proliferation of nuclear weapons will be prevented, and so we think it's a hugely important treaty.
That's very important. Now, I've read articles or glanced at articles that you're very prolific. You've written some very good articles, and two topics I know that you've mentioned before: the use of artificial intelligence for the good of humankind, and also how you can empower women to get, of course, that's the fifth goal, sustainable development goal, I should say, which is very important. Could you briefly comment on each of those?
Sure. So the artificial intelligence, or I would say, rapid development of science and technology. Some people say the fourth industrial revolution.
Right.
All of those things. I mean, we still believe that it will be largely a positive thing for the humankind. It's been throughout the history, the development of science and technology has really benefited humankind. So what we want to do is to make sure that will continue to be the case. We also think that those AIs, for example, could be potentially really beneficial to the areas that we're dealing with, arms control and disarmament, for example, in the verification areas.
Right.
So we're not saying that this is, an alarming thing and this will be a negative thing, but we just want to make sure that, the weapon systems, which is about to really, change, has a potentially enormous impact on our society, the way the wars are being fought, the method and means of warfare. Potentially it could have an impact on international law as well, that regulates the conduct of war, etc. The thing is that we don't know exactly what kind of impact it will be there, because we don't know what kind of technologies will be there. So this, we are dealing with a lot of unclarities, but we want to make sure that, for example, in the areas of artificial intelligence, we would not have weapon systems that will be fully autonomous, with the power to take human lives, be fully delegated to machines. That we think will be a problem. So all these discussions, as I said earlier, are now starting to really intensify, and we want to make sure that our values will be protected. Our international law will be also applicable in many of those critical areas. And we also want to work with scientists and engineers, private sectors, to make sure that responsible innovation and application of technologies will be beneficial to us, not the other way around. So I mean, those are the work that we are beginning to do, and it's quite interesting because it's not really a traditional way the UN works. I mean, UN is a multilateral intergovernmental entity, but we're now starting to have much more intensified dialogues with private sector people, and we're learning a lot. We are developing our own thinkings, and we hope that we will have a useful conversations and moving the agenda forward to make us safer and more secure. On the women's issue, this is one of the top priorities. I mean, there are different dimensions. One is that we know that different weapon systems have different impacts between men and women. So we need to make sure that gendered impact will be carefully actually taken into consideration when we are making new norms, new agreements, etc. So overall, we have to make sure that gender perspectives will be mainstreamed and fully taken into consideration. But also, women need to be fully and equally represented in the negotiations of all those disarmament.
That is absolutely imperative. But Undersecretary General Nakamitsu, you're dealing with a very important topic. It's one that literally is life and death for the entire planet, and we commend you for the excellent work that you're doing in this area, and we encourage all of the countries to get involved in this and to reduce the threat of nuclear risk. But I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.